Hello, I'm Karl Shallowhorn for the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition. And on behalf of the coalition, I would like to welcome you to a special episode of our Facebook Live series, this time featuring the documentary, My Brother Lost in Time, A Bipolar Life. According to Mental Health America, 1 in 40 American adults live with bipolar disorder. Although bipolar disorder is less common than depression and anxiety, it is the sixth leading cause of disability worldwide. It could take an average of 10 years from the time a person first experiences symptoms to the time they are actually diagnosed with the condition. Many people who live with bipolar disorder also struggle with addictions. Most people who have bipolar disorder are diagnosed with something else first. They're often misdiagnosed with depression, ADHD, schizophrenia, or physical health conditions. It's also possible to have one of these along with bipolar disorder. In today's discussion, we're going to explore the various statistics I've just mentioned through the lens of the documentary, My Brother Lost in Time, A Bipolar Life, which was written and directed by Mark Anthony Dellas and Dan Lukasik. We're going to first hear from one of the documentary's sponsors, Patrick P. Lee, from the Patrick P. Lee Foundation, and then watch the film, and when we return, we'll be joined by Mark, Dan, and Jay Mogavero, Executive Director of the Patrick P. Lee Foundation.
My name is Patrick Lee. I am the chairman of the Lee Foundation. We focus our grants on education and mental health. Our reason for supporting mental health is a personal one. You see, I am the father of a son with schizophrenia. I should have said that I was the father of a son with schizophrenia. We lost our son and brother, Pat, 7 years ago. Pat was diagnosed when he was in his early 20s. I can still remember the doctor delivering the news. I did not know what schizophrenia was, and I did not understand what it would mean for Pat and my family. We did the best we could for Pat. It was not easy, and there were times we struggled to find him effective medications and treatment. Awareness of mental illness has come a long way since my son was diagnosed over 40 years ago, but there is still so much that must be done. We must educate our community about serious mental illness. With knowledge comes understanding. With understanding comes compassion. Maybe then people will choose to help those who are struggling rather than averting their gaze or hurriedly crossing the street. We must also advocate for increased funding from our state and federal governments. Philanthropy can help, but it cannot fund mental illness. It is the responsibility of all of us to demand government action. We cannot and should not delay. I want to recognize crisis services for their commitment in supporting individuals experiencing a mental health crisis. Their work is not easy, but it is so very important. I also want to thank Dan Lukasik for sharing his family's story and giving me the opportunity to tell mine. Thank you.
Paul never believed he had mental illness. He would go through periods where he was what I now know to be bipolar depression, in which he could be manic. He would be up for hours or days. He would give away every cent he had. He would make all these kinds of impulsive, erratic decisions. Sometimes he'd fall into these deep depressions, some lasting weeks and others times months. He couldn't get out of bed, he couldn't work, and he didn't want to be with other people. Maybe the last time I saw him, we got in an argument. He said, I don't have mental illness, you do. And he screamed that at me. And it was hard to keep my composure, and I said, yeah, man, I do have mental illness, but you do too, and it's okay. I take medication, I go to therapy. I have to do things because I have mental illness. I have major depression and have lived with it for 20-something years. And I tried to reach him, and I thought I could, but in the end, I couldn't.
Bipolar disorder is like depression, but there's a manic episode. So you have both the depression and the mania, at least one episode. It all gets very disruptive. But the thing about it that's important is that this is an illness that we need to treat as such.
I think I'd like to start with some of my earliest memories of my brother and my family. We have a family of, my mom and dad had 5 kids. I have 3 older siblings, my sister Diane, my brother Wally, and my brother Tony. And then there's like a 6-year difference, and then I was the 4th one born, and my younger brother Paul was 3 years younger than me. We grew up, my younger brother and I did, in this old farmhouse outside of Newfane, New York. And it was this big white farmhouse, tall with a big roof. It was in the countryside, surrounded by pear trees and a walnut tree, and it was kind of like a Huckleberry Finn childhood. And we lived on this street called Hope Lane. It was named that because our neighbor had an Italian last name named Speranza, which if you translate it from Italian means hope. So he named it Hope Lane. My siblings moved out of the house. They were older than us. So at some point it was just my younger brother Paul and I. You know, we get into all kinds of mischief, and we'd be dirty all the time from playing in the woods. And I remember some of my earliest memories are of my mother giving us a bath at the same time. And she'd scrub us down to get all the dirt off and then wipe us down together. So we really did everything together. We had an old basketball court, and we would play basketball and pretend that we were an NBA championship game. It was just such a magical time, and you know, we were so close. We would lay on Hope Lane and we'd look up at the stars, and we could see shooting stars and satellites and all kinds of airplanes, and we could just lay there for hours. It seemed like time stood still, like it would just go on forever and ever, but it didn't, of course. And as we got older, we grew further apart.
If someone grows up in a family that is disorganized because of substance abuse by the parents or their own mental illness, that complicates and certainly leads to traumatic experiences for that individual in their childhood. And that, you know, then increases the risk.
My dad was a World War II veteran who fought in the Navy. He married my mom, this great beauty. They had 5 kids together, but over time, my dad became a really bad alcoholic. We don't know, but he had all the signs of manic depression himself. And I think he drank to manage that. And he became physically and emotionally abusive. So Paul, you know, he started out with some cards against him. You know, I think he had some very serious genetic predisposition to this, but also just trauma.
There's a higher risk when there is a first-degree relative who has the illness, such as a sibling or a parent. Also, there's environmental things that can impact it. Something like a severe trauma or stress, which is a challenge because sometimes as people start to experience symptoms, rather than get psychiatric treatment, they try to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, which only makes it worse.
My brother and I took different paths. I did well in school, did sports. My brother Paul took the opposite path, not just with pot, but it quickly escalated when he was 14 to LSD. When I was at college, our mother called my brother Wally and said Paul had threatened her. They were driving in a car together, my brother Paul and my mother, and then Paul pulled the car over. He ordered my mom to get out, and she ran into a nearby bar and crying, weeping, and something was clearly wrong with my brother Paul. My brother Wally went down to Newfane and took my brother to ECMC Psychiatric Center. And at the time, they thought, or they told us he had schizophrenia. That was the first of several breakdowns Paul went through over the course of his lifetime. When that happened, he was about 15 or 16. They said he'd be put on medication and then just released from the hospital.
Bipolar disorder is treatable, and one of the challenges is if someone refuses treatment, the treatment that maybe the medical staff strongly believe that the person needs. We have to balance that with their rights to refuse treatment. However, if someone is in a position where they are imminently at danger to themselves or others, medical staff can apply for treatment over objection, which is a legal process.
It was as if my brother was lost in time. Over the years, we saw each other less and less, and then there came a point where we didn't see him at all. And I remember driving over that bridge, over the river, my cell phone rang and he said, "Is this Dan Lukasik?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "This is the Lackawanna Police Department." And he said, "I have terrible news to tell you. Your brother was found dead." I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, we found him dead in a motel room, and I'm sorry, drugs were involved, and he had been there a few days dead, and there were a number of crack files found, and they suspected fentanyl was involved." They gave me Paul's keys, the keys to his house, which I hadn't been in maybe in 5 years. This beautiful home right by the waterfront in Buffalo, New York, a beautiful townhouse. But when we stepped foot inside the house, it was so shocking on so many levels, because I walked in there and it looked like somebody had just destroyed the inside of the home. And I guess when he died and, I was preparing to say a eulogy at his funeral, I was trying to travel back in time to that time when we were so close and kind of remember him as this innocent child who he was. Even when he had grown up and he had these episodes of manic depression, bipolar depression, he helped so many people. He was such a generous, caring, loving person. There'd be long stretches of time. I remember one lasting over 10 years or more where things were going great with his career. He had a lot of friends, he was going to a therapist, and he was taking care of his physical and mental health. He had his ups and downs like all of us do, but for the most part, he seemed happy. But then as he grew older, the periods between breakdowns got shorter and shorter.
It's typically a lifelong issue that someone has to deal with. And the best thing they can do is to get a treatment plan that is helpful to them. A person with bipolar has to start to learn how to take care of themselves, how to get the treatment they need, how to get good sleep, have a structured life of some sort that has supports built in. Another thing that some people do with someone they know and trust is to get a psychiatric advance directive, which can help them say, these are the kinds of treatments that I want, and the ones I don't want when I'm in my manic episode.
I was always trying to help my brother, and like a father would. And so when my brother died, it wasn't just my brother dying. It was like my son dying, and I felt like I had failed him, I felt the system had failed him. There weren't really many places to turn. And I was really unconsolable for a while.
Family members are put through very challenging times with this because the person will often reject and blame the family rather than accept the support. They feel that there's something bad about them if they have a mental illness, or it's their fault.
The Latin or Greek word for stigma is wound, So I think a more accurate way of thinking about stigma is going back to its root. And when we stigmatize somebody, we wound them in a way. Paul had been involuntarily committed to a mental health institution and had this big mark on his back of someone with mental illness. And I think that wounded him a great deal.
In September, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, nationwide sponsors walks, and they have one here at Canalside in Buffalo. I remember when these first started, this talks to the issue of stigma. There was probably 20 people walking around Delaware Park Lake, and last year it was, I think they had thousands, and it had to be moved to Canalside. When stigma goes down, treatment goes up. So I'm going to be hopeful that we're going to see some progress and see an opportunity to at least greatly reduce the number of people who take their lives.
Fentanyl may have been the mechanism of my brother's death, but I believe it was really from a lifetime of not getting the mental health care he so desperately needed. Beginning when he was about 7, he got a close-and-play record player. He could play that all day long. So as he grew older, he loved all kinds of music. He started playing guitar himself when he was about 14. Especially at the end, that was really the place, I think, if he had any comfort, it was that. I wanted to know from him if he felt that I'd let him down, that I hadn't saved him. And after he died, I had this strong sense of his spirit saying to me, it's okay, he was kind of at peace. And it was very comforting to me, very comforting to me. Mental illness doesn't have to have the final say. Love can, and so can hope. Love those who struggle with mental illness and never stop hoping and never stop trying to help.
Thank you for taking the time to watch that poignant documentary. So before we begin our discussion, we have a couple of housekeeping rules. Our program concludes at 8 p.m. During this time, if you have a question, please type it into the comment box and we will respond accordingly. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Mark Anthony Dellas. Mark is a cinematographer, editor, and post-production specialist with experience on a variety of short and long-form film and television programs. He started his career serving several years as a digital intermediate engineer at Harbor Picture Company in New York, where he helped build and maintain world-class edit, color, finishing, and storage systems on countless projects. For 7 years, he worked in Santa Fe, New Mexico on such projects like The Fleeting Structure, which won several awards at multiple international film festivals, and he served as cinematographer on First We Bomb New Mexico, an award-winning independent feature documentary about the tragic downwind effects of the Trinity bomb on Native and New Mexican communities throughout New Mexico. His latest project is an upcoming documentary detailing the life and art of George O'Keeffe. He continues to follow his passion for storytelling from his hometown of Buffalo, New York. Next up, we have Dan Lukasik. Dan has practiced law for over 30 years and has served as the wellness coordinator for the New York State Office of Court Administration for the past 5 years. Since his diagnosis of major depression 25 years ago, Dan has dedicated his life to raising awareness about mental illness and combating stigma. He is executive producer of this evening's featured documentary and is the creator of the recently launched website, the Buffalo Depression Project. And last but not least is our final panelist, Jane Mogavero. Jane is executive director of the Patrick P. Lee Foundation, a private foundation focusing on education and mental health. In her role, Jane oversees a $3.5 million in annual grant making and provides knowledge management of community resources, programs, and best practices within the foundation's interest areas. In mental health, the foundation focuses on adults living with serious mental illnesses through programmatic and capital grants, as well as advocating for mental health reform at the state level, as well as advocating for grants at the state and federal level. Jane received her undergraduate education from Fordham University and earned her law degree from Boston College Law School. Welcome, Mark, Dan, and Jane. So, Dan, I'd like to start off with you. Why did you feel you needed to share your story through video as opposed to, say, a written piece? Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Yeah, actually, when I first thought of writing something about my brother, is the 1-year anniversary of his death, which was about a year ago, and I just couldn't seem to find the words to express our relationship, the mental health challenges we both faced, and I just couldn't seem to do it. And I like to write. So it was really through an amazing series of events that I met the filmmaker, Mark Dellas, who can talk about that. And I'd never thought of doing any kind of film, but it just seemed to sort of happen, and we seemed to work together very naturally. And it became a very powerful way for me to deal with my own grief about losing my brother, but also the larger topic of mental illness in general in our local Buffalo community throughout the country, and the topic of stigma. My brother experienced quite a bit of stigma in his lifetime. And I myself, I had it nowhere near as worse as my brother, but have experienced stigma too. And I know it's a big issue for lots of people.
Thank you, Dan. And so with that, obviously, through a documentary, you can do a lot more. As you say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think the documentary does a lot in terms of just portraying your brother's life in a way that you really can't put into words.
I think that's really a great point. And I always say when I meet people and they discuss the film that the filmmaker, Mark, who's with us tonight, is a genius. And he's the one who took the numerous photos and memories and documents. And really, the music is very powerful to me. It means a lot to my heart, and wove together that story that when I first saw it, it blew me away. It brought tears to my eyes. So I'm so happy that I had the good fortune of meeting Mark, and it's brought us all the way here to today, and hopefully we're reaching some people.
That's terrific. So Mark, actually, I do want to go on to you and ask about the project itself. What attracted you about the project? And what were your thoughts when Dan approached you about working with him on this?
Well, actually, it's interesting. It was actually my dad who first approached me and knew Dan. I'm not even sure how they see each other at Starbucks. And he expressed to me that Dan was was thinking about writing a story on his brother, but maybe would be open to making a film. And then he set up the meeting, and it was kind of a perfect story, I felt, for me to help tell. And immediately I recognized in Dan something that I see in myself and a lot of people. And it's something that my neighbor used to call the creative imperative. And, sometimes we need to create, or we feel this need to create as a outlet to help cope and to help heal. That's something that I was looking to do personally through this project, as I had been hospitalized against my will for a period of time before leaving New Mexico. And I think success is going towards your unknown. And there's a lot of unknowns there. And I definitely felt a lot of stigma. I felt wounded. So it was something that I knew I had to approach.
It's interesting to say, of course, you mentioned the term wounded, and of course, Dan, during the documentary, you talk about the term wound. There's also a phrase called wounded healer that you may be aware of. And I think what you're saying, you're talking about the narrative, Mark, it is like being a wounded healer. It's taking what your wounds are and then transforming them into something that helps not only yourself heal, but others as well. Would you say that's correct?
Thanks, Karl. Yeah, I would say that's spot on. It's been a healing process for me, and my goal with this is to provide hope and to others, and to generate conversation. I feel like talking about these things, that's the best way of getting over some trauma or whatever you're going through.
I think, Karl, when the fact that I was even met Mark was a 1 in a million event. And that not only would I meet this amazing filmmaker, but he would have this sensitivity through his own lived experience with mental illness to capture my brother's spirit and struggles, and mine too. And then all kind of other people, all kind of other angels flew out of the sky. The Patrick Lee Foundation, PBS got involved, Crisis Services, the Suicide Prevention Coalition. The fact that we're here today really, in my own mind, is a miracle. Because when Mark and I started, there were times when we were filming, I thought, I can't do this anymore. And then the night of the premiere, I told this story at my local Catholic church Sunday, was the night of the premiere. I didn't tell anybody this, but it was at UB Center for the Arts, and it was packed, and I was walking in, and I had my hands in my pockets, and my hand, the one pocket, I was holding my grandmother's rosary. My grandmother's been gone 40 years, and the rosary's over 100 years old. So when I'm in trouble or I need help, I take that rosary. And the other hand in my other pocket was holding my brother's hand. And I said, I can't go through this. I can't go through this tonight. I actually had the feeling I had to turn around and go home. It was just so overwhelming. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I kept going, and I feel if the rest of my life I keep going in honor of his memory and to reach other people, that's why I'm here.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful story, Dan. So let's bring you into the conversation, Jane, of course, with the Patrick Lee Foundation. And Dan talked about the wonderful support that your foundation has provided. Can you tell us more about the Patrick Lee Foundation and the work that you do to reduce stigma through your various projects?
Yeah, I would just, every time I'm with Dan, whether virtually or in person, I'm just so moved by his story and Mark's film. And I've seen it, countless times now. And every time I think I take a little piece away that's different or something else resonates with me. So just so grateful to be sharing this space with all of you tonight. So thank you for having me. The Patrick Lee Foundation was founded in 2007. And at that time, Patrick, who is an engineer and entrepreneur, was selling his business, International Motion Control. And he took part of those proceeds to start the foundation. The foundation, which is private and charitable, focuses on education and mental health. Both areas very personal to Patrick. Much of our work in education has to do with post-secondary scholarships for students studying in STEM degrees. And Patrick himself was a recipient of assistance by way of the War Orphans Bill. And Patrick will say that his education is the reason he was able to find that success, and it gave him a foundation to build from, really just changing his life trajectory. So it's a very, pay it forward moment for us when we do those scholarships. And then, as all of you heard, if you were able to see the video of Patrick's remarks, mental health is very personal to him and his family as well. His older son, also named Patrick, was diagnosed with schizophrenia at a time when there really weren't opportunities to share and connect in the way that we're doing tonight. It was a very lonely place to be. They didn't really understand fully what a diagnosis of schizophrenia would mean for their son, but also their family as a unit, as caregivers and supporters of him. And so it really guides our work. We are so grateful for opportunities like this, where we can help raise the voices of people with lived experience, give them an opportunity to learn from each other, to share, make it clear that you're not alone. I think I can't name one room I've ever been in where there was someone who wasn't touched by mental illness, whether they were acknowledging it or maybe just not comfortable yet to share. We all are having those moments. So as a foundation, when we see opportunities like this, again, to educate the community, to break down that stigma, we're really grateful to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Jane. So if you're just joining us, I'm Karl Shallowhorn from the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition, here with Mark Anthony Dellas and Dan Lukasik, who co-produced and co-directed the documentary, My Brother Lost in Time, Bipolar Life, as well as Jane Mogavero from the executive director of the Patrick Lee Foundation. So we do have a question from the audience, and if you do have a question, you can type into the comment box. You can also visit our website at letstalkstigma.org to take the pledge to end stigma. If you're connected with a business, organization, or faith community, you can become an organizational member of Anti-Stigma Coalition. You can find information for this on the website under the Members tab. So the question that came from the audience, the first one, this I guess would go to Mark and Dan. Have you considered a longer format film? The person says, I didn't want it to end. It was so moving.
Well, I can try to answer that. Thank you first for your question, and I really appreciate it. I would say we tried to hit the sweet spot here, and I think we told the story in a way where it kind of ended with a hopeful note, and that was our goal with this one. That being said, Dan and I, having the creative imperative, wanting to help others, we do have plans to make another film that will be a little bit longer next time.
Care to embellish on that project a little bit, Dan?
Yeah. Actually, maybe after we made the first film, and it just unexpectedly went in so many places, and so many people had a positive reaction to it. Maybe after we're done recuperating from the first time, Mark and I said, "What should we do?" We kind of looked at each other. Should we do another film? And so we decided to do a film that means a lot to both of us. And about 8 years ago, I started mentoring a child from St. Luke's Mission. It's on the east side of Buffalo. Buffalo's a very segregated city. East side is very poor, and I felt at the time I was going through a depression 8 years ago, and poor in spirit. So I went there and I met the director, and I said, I'm here to be some kind of service. I didn't know what that would be. And they matched me with a 10-year-old child, a black child who didn't have a dad, and I don't have a son. And we started seeing each other, and it didn't go well in the beginning. He would kick me or not talk to me, but as time went on, we grew much, much, much closer together. And he's a big part of my life now, and we love each other. And it's been an important part of my own recovery and sustaining my mental health, and people mistakenly will say, oh, it's great what you do for George, but it's really great what he does for me. And I think sometimes when people see us together in public, they would think, or they might say, oh, George has mental illness, or does he have mental illness? I go, like, no, I'm the one with mental illness, not George. So I think it turns a lot of assumptions on their misconceptions on their head. And I think it's about the power of friendship and community and connection as it relates to mental illness. And I could tell you from my own experience, one of the worst aspects of my major depression was the terrible loneliness I felt so much of the time. And, sometimes seeing George would be the best thing in my day, and he knows that. And I just think it's something I now I really want to do it. And Mark and I were talking today how excited we are about it. So I'll turn it over to Mark with any thoughts he may have.
Yeah, just to sum it up, peer support is incredibly important. And just like this film that you all just watched, it's going to be a way that we can help ourselves and hopefully help others. It's a two-way street, if you will.
Thanks. So we have several questions from the audience, and I want to get to the first one here. And I'm just going to toss this one out because it talks about stigma, and anyone can respond to this. And it says, can you tell us about the role of shame with stigma? And I think each of you might have a different perspective on this. So the role of shame with stigma. Anybody care to jump in?
I know from experience that I, felt a lot of shame, and a lot of the times you shut down, you don't reach out to your peers, you isolate. So I think it's important to kind of get out of that cycle if you can, and connect with people and believe in yourself.
I think too that we live in a culture and a society that prizes productivity and being useful. And when you're afflicted with mental illness, as I was certainly in the first few years of my illness, your brain, you lose the capacity to concentrate, to get things done, and you start feeling useless and incapable of running your own life, of helping people, at the time I was diagnosed, I was the managing partner at my law firm. I was responsible for lots of people. And I had a young family, so it was terrifying. And so I kept trying to beat myself up, like, come on, get out of it, snap out of this. I was like beating myself up, it was really like shaming myself to try to pull myself out of my depression. But it, of course, didn't work, only made things worse. And, it's just as painful. Like I say in the film, my brother, was wounded, and I was too. And not only, it's is worse than a physical wound, that's how vicious stigma can be. And not only from other people, but also inside of ourselves, where we shame ourselves and stigmatize ourselves.
Yeah. And I won't add much because I think they've covered it so well, but how I have a family member who lived with schizoaffective disorder. She had her PhD, and the fear that if someone knew that, it would take away, they would look at that and not her accomplishments, maybe professionally, that it would overshadow, her other achievements. And even after this person has passed, some of our family members won't publicly acknowledge that diagnosis. And, this is, 2025, we're hoping that we're better than we were when Patrick's son was diagnosed, but those are real concerns, and I respect them, when people don't feel comfortable sharing, and I hope we're headed in the right direction. And I think how younger generations are talking about it and being more open about their mental health, and how we're seeing it portrayed in different media. Those might seem like insignificant things, how media is portraying it, but it's not. We don't want to just hear when something goes wrong, or there's a tragedy associated with mental health. There's so many positive examples of people, in recovery and succeeding. And certainly my colleagues on the screen today are examples of that.
Thank you, Jane. So I have a question, also another one from the audience about involuntary hospitalization. And this is kind of a tough one, but as far as medication, further stigmatization, revolving around individuals experiencing mental illness, how do these things come together in a way that is further stigmatizing? Involuntary hospitalization, medication, that kind of thing.
Well, it can be, if you're involuntarily hospitalized, it can be traumatic. Maybe you've never been on medication before. Maybe, they could be giving you medication that you don't react well to. That's why in the documentary, I really tried to. It was important for me to have the doctor in there, and I tried to separate it from Dan's part of the documentary by even putting it in a 4:3 aspect ratio. But she speaks to if there's any chance that you could end up in a hospital like that, you could get a psychiatric advance directive, which like the doctor says, can make sure that they give you what works for you when you're in crisis.
I'd like to speak to another aspect of that question. I'm sure Jane might chime in, but one of the reasons I know Patrick got involved was how much family members or loved ones struggle when someone they care about is afflicted with mental illness. And I don't pretend to have any answers about hospitalization. My brother was hospitalized probably 10 times over the course of his lifetime, and he never wanted to be. There was one of them, a couple of them were on an involuntary basis. But I think that from a family perspective, as a loved one, it was so painful to us, because what would typically happen is he would be released after 3 days. And, my brother was still clearly very sick after 3 days. And when I asked them, they said, well, we've stabilized him. That's all we can do. And I said, he needs more like 3 months rather than 3 days of care, because he was just so sick at the time. But the complicating factor is respecting people's autonomy and sense of agency and choice. But I think the problem that I encountered with my brother, he never accepted that he had mental illness, and he didn't want to take any medication. But his life was spiraling so far out of control that he was a danger to himself and to other people. But trying to negotiate that and get him the help he needed was just so difficult to do. And also, it doesn't speak well, I think, of how we think about mental illness and, perhaps some of the things that would be helpful. It's just not about medication or therapy. It's about community building. And that's why I launched the Buffalo Depression Project as kind of a virtual community, that where we can all come together and find community around mental illness, because I think that that's often lacking in people's recovery.
Yeah. So I think what we're all sort of talking about or thinking about is sort of that continuum of care, right? So the goal would be, right, that we're having great community-based services that prevent people from getting to that critical point where they need intervention or hospitalization. And, again, it's a continuum. And I think one thing that the Lee Foundation has noticed is that we lack, and I think Dan talked about it, sort of step up and step down care from the hospital. So we shouldn't go from 0 to 100, right? You're in the community, you're spiraling, now you're hospitalized. Like, what are those middle programs that we're lacking in the system? When someone, and oftentimes I can speak from our family's experience, we could see some of these symptoms getting to a place of concern. If only we had had that sort of middle level, an intensive outpatient program, as an example, that provides more services than the community, but again, not that hospitalization. And then the same as you're coming out of the hospital, we have lots of regulations, lots of codes and policies and, legal things that the system can and cannot do. But how are we helping people transition out in a smooth and warm way back into the community? And again, these sort of step down programs from the hospital that would have been, sounds like, appropriate for Dan's brother. Maybe he doesn't need that intensive hospitalization, but he's not ready to go back to where he just came from in the community. So we certainly, as a philanthropic partner, look to see where are those gaps, how can we help build out the system and the continuum of full care, so that we can avoid some of those extreme traumatic experiences that, Mark alluded to.
That's a great point, Jane. And of course, we have some resources like that, in the Westbrook area, but certainly not enough. There's always room for more. And that's where I think, this is my own platform to say that we need more advocacy and more people speaking up and more just really get into the policymakers, the people that can, make these decisions, because as was Patrick said so aptly in the introduction, that it isn't just a philanthropic effort. It takes, federal funding, it takes state funding to make these things happen. So I just want to make that little pitch. So I have a question actually for Dan and Mark. How do family and friends respond to the film? That's a question that someone wants to know from the audience.
That's difficult. I my 3 older siblings, and I really respect their decision, didn't want to be in the film. I think for a lot of reasons, we all handle our relationship to someone with mental illness differently. And because of my brother's illness, he had burned a lot of bridges with them. But they were much older than us. And so it was really growing up, as shown in the film, it was really my younger brother and I together for most of our childhood. And at that time, with my dad's alcoholism, my dad died of alcoholism when I was 19. My dad's own illness of alcoholism, and I suspect bipolar disorder, had only worsened. So my younger brother and I got the brunt of it. So we really had, I think I felt a lot of anxiety about making the film, in the sense that it was my family's story, not just my story and my younger brother's story, but my siblings were included, even though they did not appear in the film. But I think it was difficult for them to watch it. It's a pretty raw film. Mm-hmm. And I think about him, think about my brother, reflect back on decades ago, or their own childhoods.
How about you, Mark? Of course, you're the director per se that was behind the scenes, but any reaction from any of your family members?
Yeah, my family was proud of me. That's for sure. And like I said, my dad kind of introduced me to Dan. So, without that connection, maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity to tell this important story.
Thank you. So once again, Karl Shallowhorn here from the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition. We've got just about 10 minutes left, so we have time for a couple more questions before we wrap up. But I do want to say, if you do have a question, put it in the comment box. We'll try to get to it. But I have one from the audience. This is a tougher one again, but I think it bears to be asked. Do you think that a history of involuntary hospitalization. If I can read this here from my glasses, creates a narrative with therapists that an individual is incapable of caring for themselves. So once again, a history of involuntary hospitalizations does create a narrative that a person's incapable of caring for themselves. That's more clinical, but it's also more relative, I think, to maybe where you're going, Dan, with some of the comments you've made before.
Yeah, I think I should say that I've never been involuntarily committed. Probably should have been at different times in my life, or, voluntarily gone into the hospital at different times. I think that, if I get this right, what a mental health provider, how they might look at somebody when they find out they've been involuntarily committed, what does that do to a therapist's own sense of this person's potential, his future trajectory or her future trajectory in terms of regaining their mental health? I think it's such a significant event, at least it was for my brother, that I do think that had an effect on how they viewed him. I think the effect was maybe going from the category of someone with a mental health problem to someone with mental illness to someone with a serious mental illness. And maybe Mark can speak to that too, because it is more recent experience with this.
Yeah, sometimes it'll, that could certainly happen. Sometimes you have to find the right therapist for you. It took me a few tries to find the right therapist. And when I did, they helped me believe in myself again. And we have a really good relationship.
One of the things we do in our mental health funding is we actually support scholarships for graduate students who are entering the mental health field. And I certainly am not a clinician, but I will say that I think they choose this field because they believe that they can make a difference and there is recovery and hope for their patients. And so I can't speak to everyone's experience, but the clinicians I've met locally, they believe in the work they're doing. And I think they probably would view it almost like a health diagnosis of maybe the cancer came back, but that doesn't mean we're not going to get you back, to compare it to like a health diagnoses. And so I'm encouraged by the people working in this community. I find sometimes where we find shortcomings are not because the people aren't dedicated and committed. It's usually a process issue, not a people issue. So, just feel good about the people we have working here in Western New York.
I have to say, and I think, Jane, you remember this before, but my nephew actually is a recipient of one of your scholarships who is now actively a psychiatrist and working in the field. And I just saw him for dinner. He's doing great. But okay, so Mark, I have a question for you, which is more on the technical side in terms of cinematography, which I just loved the techniques that you used for the documentary. I thought it was so well shot. Why did you decide to do it the way that you did? You talked about, of course, the 4:3 ratio, which I'd never heard that term before, but just, the B-roll and the color. The color was very subdued. Why did you, make all those decisions to shoot it the way that you did?
Well, I knew, it was an emotional process editing it, so that there was part of me that wanted to do it in black and white, but I felt like that was too simple. So I did use kind of a blue tone to everything, which was just the mood that I was feeling as I was editing. I see another question popped in and it says, use the road, birds on a wire, water, and other calming visuals. These were deliberate decisions. We kind of used the road. I used the road in a way as a metaphor, when things were going well for Paul, Dan's brother, I show the road going straight. When Dan and his brother go separate ways or in life, in a way, I show there's a fork in the road. I also kind of use the visual of the bird as a spirit almost. We came to see the bird at multiple points in the film. Yeah. Otherwise, I just try to capture beauty, and that's that.
I'd like to say too that for me, when I came to Mark, the title had been on my mind for a long time. My brother lost in time, and people often ask what that means. And time is an important theme in the movie because I feel that my brother was lost in time because there were long periods when I didn't see him, not because I didn't want to see him. He didn't want to see me, or when he was in his manic phase, he would experience grandiosity. He would feel that he was an angel in heaven and brought here to fight for justice, or he would go through periods of time where he thought he was being persecuted. The FBI was trying to hunt him down and kill him, and I was part of the FBI. So a lot of after he died was a process of me trying to find my brother. And I didn't want the last word on his life to be that he died of a overdose of fentanyl, or that he was just some quote unquote crazy person who he was really an amazing person in many ways. And I think there's a beauty to that was important for me to show. And it was important for me to show how much I loved my brother. And I did the best I could, to show that. And I think Mark made that magic happen.
I think you absolutely did show that through the documentary, Dan. I felt it, and I think everybody who's seen it has felt it. I've seen it a few times, and every time I watch it, I can feel that experience that you shared with us. So we do have to wrap up, but before we do that, I'd like to offer you each an opportunity to maybe share a closing comment about our discussion today, maybe some parting words. So let's start with Jane. How about you?
Sure. I'm just going to really just express my gratitude first to all three of you. Dan, every time I see the film and I hear your story, I'm so inspired by what you've done. And you've taken this film and he's taken it across New York State and beyond and shared it and opened up these conversations in classrooms and in professional settings and here today. So thank you. And Mark, thanks for sharing your story. I did not know some of that till tonight. And it's just wonderful that you two found each other. So your dad did a good job. And Karl, we've been longtime colleagues, and the work you do advocating locally and nationally for mental health is just really remarkable. So we're just privileged to be a part of this team here, and glad for the opportunity. For our part, we're going to continue advocating and bringing people together. We have some interesting work that's happening at the city and county level and with New York State that we'll be, coming out with soon. But really, it's because of all of you that we, know we're making a difference. And so thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Jane. Mark.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Karl, Jane, and Dan, and everybody who came to this, who watched the screening tonight. I really appreciate it. And, if you're facing stigma, you're not alone.
I think I'll end with this, is that at the end of the film, I talk about love and hope. And when I think of wound, the wound that comes from stigmatizing with someone with mental illness, I think of love and hope as like a balm to those kind of wounds, And a couple nights before the film premiered, I had this real vivid dream. And I often don't dream or remember them, but this one was pretty powerful, and it has stayed with me. And it was 2 nights before the premiere at the UB Center for the Arts, and I woke up and I was kind of half awake, but kind of asleep. And I felt this powerful sensation of someone laying next to me, and it was my brother. He was a young child like he was in the movie, and very vividly he rolled next to me to cuddle with me, and I put my arm around him, and that just told me, that he was with me in this film and this project, and that it really just gave me a lot of comfort.
That is so incredibly powerful and a great way, I think, to wrap things up, Dan. So thank you so much for sharing that personal story. So as a reminder, thank you for our audience for joining us. We need you to take the pledge to end stigma by going to our website at letstalkstigma.org. If your organization would like to join us in our cause, there's information on the website as well. So just click on the members tab to find out how you can do that. Together, we can make this all happen. So once again, I'd like to thank our panelists, Mark Anthony Dellas, Dan Lukasik, and Jay Mogavero. I'd also like to thank the folks behind the scenes, Mike Telesco from Telesco Creative Group for all his technical support, and Karen Karaszewski from KKPR Buffalo for her support as well. So on behalf of the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition, until next time, I'm Karl Shallowhorn. Be well.